Alright, welcome back folks, another edition of WrestleRant here today for my full review of Judgment Day 2008 as seen on the WWE Network, and of course the entire month of May is dedicated to my reviews of Judgment Day, every installment from 98 to 2009, and you can check out the other installments from 98 to 2007, already up here on the channel. Today, like I said before, is devoted to Judgment Day 08, Saturday will be devoted to Judgment Day 2009, and from there I'll be talking about Payback, Money in the Bank, and then SummerSlam for the summer. That being said, kicking off the show, John Cena versus JBL. And I'll start off by saying this. I thought I was going to enjoy this show more than I did, considering the fact I grew up in this time in 2008 as a wrestling fan. And I would be more, and I've never seen this show before, by the way, either. I've never seen it in its entirety. I've only seen bits and pieces. I already knew the results in most of the matches. I had just never seen the event before, so this is my first time watching it. But I thought I would enjoy the event more than I did, considering this is when, during the period in time that I got into wrestling, and I'll get to that by the end of the show. But yeah, kicking off the show, John Cena versus JBL, a match that you would never think would kick off the show. John Cena in the opening match, I can't remember the last time that was the case. But the match was pretty boring for the most part. Of course, this was stemming from their involvement in the Fatal 4-Way Elimination match at Backlash for the WWE Championship, where John Cena eliminated JBL from the match. JBL took exception to that and feuded with John Cena going into this pay-per-view. So it was obviously just a filler feud for John Cena before he went back into contention for the WWE title back in June, I want to say, where he faced Triple H for the title at Night of Champions. So, I mean, they had already done this feud before. Like I talked about this when I reviewed Judgment Day 2005 last week. You know, they had a really good match on that show, too. That's probably why this match was so disappointing, because that was like Quit Rules. This was just a standard singles match. But, you know, Cena and JBL, they've never had the greatest of chemistry. Like, I kind of enjoyed their parking lot brawl, the New York parking lot brawl from Great American Bash later in 2008. The One Night Stand match, I didn't really care for. The First Blood match. Just a standard one-on-one match. It was pretty boring, much like their WrestleMania 21 match, which a lot of people are not a fan of. So it was not the best way to kick off the show, and I don't know why they did anyway. Probably because they already had two other big matches closing the show in the two world title matches. But it was weird for this to kick off the show. But yeah, it was a pretty boring match for about 15 minutes before John Cena just had the AA out of nowhere, the FU, whatever they were calling it at that time, to pick up the victory. So, yeah, a standard singles match, but pretty boring to say the least, which is not all that surprising given the lack of in-ring chemistry between Cena and JBL in just a regular one-on-one match. They thrive when they're given a stipulation like a First Blood, I Quit, or a parking lot brawl like I talked about before. One-on-one match, pretty boring stuff. John Cena wins, LOL. Up next for the WWE Tag Team titles, John Morrison and The Miz defending against Kane and CM Punk. This was stemming from Kane and Punk beating the tag champs in non-title action on an episode of ECW. On the ECW before this show, Morrison and Miz beating both Kane and Punk in singles competition. So it was a pretty basic feud for the most part. We beat the champs, we get a title shot, something like that. Kane and Punk were not a regular tag team. Kane was the ECW champion, Punk was Mr. Money in the Bank. They just did this to give them something to do, so they just put him in a tag team title match with Morrison and Miz. A good match, though. I probably enjoyed this match more than I did the opener between Cena and JBL. Punk always worked well with both Morrison and Miz. They had a lot of matches together in 07, 08, and 09. And Kane was kind of, he worked his part well as well. His time in ECW was kind of, although he was ECW champion, he didn't really do much. When he won the belt at WrestleMania, he briefly feuded with Chavo, and then after that point, he didn't really do anything. He was in this tag team feud with Morrison and Miz, and then he got drafted to Raw about a month or so later, where he feuded with Big Show and Mark Henry, dropped the belt, and that was it. So he didn't really do much on ECW, but yeah, a good match though. I enjoyed it. Punk doing most of the in-ring work for his team, and Kane when he was in there, like I talked about before, he held his own. It was a good match. I enjoyed it. Morrison and Miz picking up the victory after Punk was distracted by Kane on the outside after he was being beaten up by Miz. And then Morrison taking advantage of a distracted Punk, hitting the Moonlight Drive to pick up the victory and retain the WWE Tag Team title. So a good match, nothing too special, but for what it was, I enjoyed it. Up next, Shawn Michaels versus Chris Jericho. Easily the best match of the night, going without that goes without saying. Michaels and Jericho have always had amazing chemistry, and this was the year where they had that phenomenal feud for most of 2008, and it really kind of started coming out of WrestleMania, where Michaels was feuding with Batista. And then at Backlash, like I talked in my Backlash 08 review, Shawn Michaels cheating, cheating technically, when he feigned a knee injury, beat Batista, where Jericho was the special guest referee, leading to Jericho facing Michaels on this show. So 2 baby faces, Jericho was the Intercontinental Champion, and because the title was not on the line in this match, it was pretty obvious that Michaels was going to win. But what I liked most about this matchup, and I mean, the in-ring action between these two was never short of amazing. I mean, that goes for all their matches. Their matches that Green American Bash, Unforgiven, and No Mercy. Their matches on Raw. So that goes without saying. But I think what these two excelled in, and this is pretty obvious for anyone that has seen their feud, they excelled in telling a story. Where Jericho was, constantly trying to expose Michaels as the liar that he was for feigning the knee injury. Michaels, faking it for a few weeks, coming out and saying that it was not legit after all. And then Jericho said, "You're lying, prove it to me." Michaels hits him with the sweet chin music. So really a lot of good storytelling between these two, both in the weeks leading up to this match and the match itself. And although it was a babyface versus babyface dynamic, that didn't take away from it at all. And I mean, it was pretty obvious that Jericho was going to go heel at some point based off the way that he was kind of taunting Michaels, showed heel tendencies in this matchup, and a lot of people didn't know if it would really work. Jericho had just come back from, return to the WWE in late 2007. Then despite winning the IC title, he really didn't do much for most of 2000, or for the first part of 2008. So this feud with Michaels kind of rejuvenated his career. I mean, the stuff that he did, especially when he turned heel a couple weeks later. But the match itself, very, very enjoyable. Could have used a few more minutes, but for the 16 minutes they got, it was great. I loved the match. And then Michaels coming out victorious with the sweet chin music, I believe out of nowhere. I think Michaels or Jericho. What I loved about this match too, other than this, or along with it, in addition to the storytelling, that kind of ties into that, was that Jericho at one point was feigning an injury. I think it might have been a knee injury. I don't know if it was a knee injury, if he was just hurt. But Michaels was trying to hit the sweet chin music. And he was setting up for it, and he was taunting him and whatever. And Jericho, every time he tried to stand up, he would keep on falling down. So then when Michaels came to approach him, Jericho stood up and hit the codebreaker out of nowhere. So just kind of doing exactly what Michaels did the year or a couple weeks before this, when he faked his knee injury and ended up hitting with the sweet chin music. So I love that kind of storytelling here, and that was kind of just a little sneak peek of what you can expect in this match. But like I said, Shawn Michaels hitting the sweet chin music on Jericho. I don't know if it was, I think he might have rolled him up. I can't remember exactly. But still, it was a great match. Michaels picks up the victory. Jericho teasing that he was going to attack Michaels afterwards. The two shake it out, or Michaels had Jericho extended his hand to Michaels, and Michaels thought he was going to turn on him, but he didn't, and that would be saved for a few weeks later. And the two shook hands, and that was it. So a great match. Love the storytelling, and easily, like I said before, easily the match of the night. Up next, a triple threat women's match for the WWE Women's Championship. Mickie James defending against Beth Phoenix and Melina. And like I said in my Backlash review from the month prior, I don't know why they didn't just do Mickie James versus Beth for the title at Backlash. They had that random-ass multi-diva tag team match. It was like a 12-diva or a 10-diva tag team match. Whereas a couple weeks before that, Mickie James had beat Beth in England to win that title. So why they didn't do the title change on the pay-per-view made no sense to me. But she was going to invoke her rematch clause on this show. And then Melina, who was kind of buddy-buddy with Beth Phoenix for a few months in 2008, got in a fight with Beth Phoenix on the Raw before the pay-per-views. They built this up at the last minute, shoehorned Melina into the matchup, and they made it a triple threat. So the match was good. I mean, it only got 4 or 5 minutes, which is ridiculous, considering the talent of these three women. They should have gotten more time than that. But, and because of that, they weren't really able to have the great match they were capable of. But in the time they were allowed, though, they had a nice little matchup. Mickie James picking up the win with the DDT to retain her championship, and that would kind of lead into the I think it was the I Quit match, the first ever and only women only I Quit match, because we had that one with Stephanie and Vince back in 2003 and No Mercy, and this was the only Diva I Quit match in WWE history, Diva versus Diva at One Night Stand a couple weeks later. So I love that feud. I thought that was a great match too, and for what this was, I enjoyed it, but they easily could have used more time, like I said before, because all three women are great, and they could have had a better match with more time. Up next for the vacant World Heavyweight Championship, The Undertaker taking on Edge, and as a little backstory behind this bout, I mean, if you listen to my Backlash review from 2008 and then listen to this review, you might be missing something, because in this matchup, there's no world champion. The title was deemed vacant a couple weeks before this, after Undertaker's go-go plot of the Hell's Gate, as he would later call it, was banned by Vicky Guerrero after causing injury to several superstars. So that was that, and then from that point forward, immediately after that, Vicky Guerrero had stripped Undertaker of the World Heavyweight Championship because of him, injuring all these different superstars. They deemed the title vacant. Undertaker was going to contend for the title regardless. They held a championship chase in the weeks leading up to Backlash, or leading up to Judgment Day, excuse me. And the people who advanced to the Battle Royal, who won their respective matches and advanced to the Battle Royal in the main event of an episode of SmackDown, and the winner of that Battle Royal would advance to Judgment Day to face The Undertaker of the World Heavyweight Championship. Originally, Batista won. Then Edge came out, said he was medically cleared, came in, won the Battle Royal, became the new number one contender for the belt. So Undertaker versus Edge for the third consecutive time on pay-per-view. A good match. I mean, I enjoyed their other matches more at Backlash and at WrestleMania. This was just kind of the odd man out. I mean, obviously, they were just kind of building up for the TLC match at One Night Stand a couple weeks later. So the count-out finish, I mean, and maybe at that time if I was watching, it probably would have bothered me. They just kind of made this match feel like a transitional one because they were just kind of building to the blow-off match at One Night Stand, which could be said for a lot of the matches on this card, but whatever. Though it was a good match, though I enjoyed it. I mean, Undertaker and Edge have never had a bad match from what I can remember, and this was definitely not one of them. Undertaker emerging victorious via count-out, but not winning the World Heavyweight Championship. So up next, we had a nice little filler match between Jeff Hardy and MVP right before the main event. So MVP comes out, brags about how he was the longest reigning United States champion in history, then how he doesn't have a match at Judgment Day, in which he deserves to have a rematch against Matt Hardy for the United States Championship, who he lost the belt to in the month prior at Backlash. So Matt Hardy comes out but in street clothes and says, I already proved I was better than you. This person wants to prove they are better than you. And now comes Jeff Hardy, who did not return on the show. He ended up coming back on the Raw before this pay-per-view. And the whole segment with Umaga, where their match went to like a no contest or whatever it was. So that wasn't really, it wasn't too surprising to see Jeff Hardy come out. But it was a nice little pleasant surprise considering the fact that he wasn't advertised for the pay-per-view. It was nice to see him. The crowd came up, they came alive for him. And like I've said in all my, my pay-per-view reviews from 2008, the 2008 was the year of Jeff Hardy. He was so beloved by the crowd. So it was great to see him come out to for the filler match right before the main event. Because if they put the women's title match there, or even Cena versus JBL, which was boring as it was, the crowd would have been dead. So at least they were, they weren't electric for this matchup, but they were more into it. Had another match been there instead. I think Jeff Hardy being as over as he was perfect to put right before the main event. And I thought they had a good match, too. And it's funny, because they would end up rekindling this rivalry right before the SummerSlam pay-per-view a couple months later, so they would have better matches down the line. But I thought this was good for what it was. And they gave him a bunch of time, too. It's not like they gave him 4 or 5 minutes. They were out there for about 10 minutes, and they made the most of the time. They had a good matchup. Jeff Hardy winning with a whisper in the wind of all things, not a swanton bomb, which kind of took me by surprise. But a good match, though. I mean, I guess they really had to kill some time right before the 20-minute steel cage match main event. And what better person to bring out there to bring the crowd back to life than Jeff Hardy, So I thought that was nice match placement there. I thought that was pretty wise, other than, doing Cena versus JBL, which would have no doubt killed the crowd, which it did in the opener. But I thought it was a good match, though. Nice little win for Jeff Hardy, and his first pay-per-view back since, I think, No Way Out in February. In the main event, we had a steel cage match for the WWE Championship, Triple H versus Randy Orton. And from a storyline standpoint, the fact the steel cage was surrounding the ring for this matchup did not make much sense, considering the fact they had a rematch 2 weeks later at One Night Stand inside a last man standing match. So the steel cage never really felt necessary, including the fact there was no legacy of this period in time, so there was no reason for there to be a steel cage. Though, that being said, it did help the matchup and made it more enjoyable, because one-on-one, Triple H and Orton do not have the best in-ring chemistry. Their matches from 05 and 06, and their match at WrestleMania 25 in the main event was not really that good, because it was a standard singles matchup, no stipulations, no holds bar, no disqualification, stuff like that only helps these matches between Orton and Triple H. And I thought it helped this matchup as well, because the best spots from this matchup involved the cage. The traditional spots where one throws the other into the steel cage wall, trying to escape over the cage wall, trying to get it out to the outside, going through the steel cage door, stuff like that, going through the cage door, helped this matchup and made it more enjoyable. They got over 20 minutes. They made the most of it. I thought it was a solid main event. But like I said, from a storyline standpoint, though, it didn't make much sense to do a steel cage match, because they were going to blow off the feud 2 weeks later anyway at One Night Stand in the last man standing match. And I hate, when they do that, because they wrote an article about this on Bleacher Report not too long ago about how the steel cage matches in WWE, or just wrestling in general, do not mean what they used to mean. Because you go back, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago when steel cage matches, featured bloodbaths and the culmination of storylines, the culmination of, long-running rivalries. We don't get that anymore. Now they're just transitional matches. That's what this felt like. But that being said, like I said before, though, from strictly a main event standpoint, if you're not going to watch One Night Stand or Backlash or any other pay-per-view from '08, this is the only pay-per-view you're going to watch. It was good. It was a good match. I enjoyed it. I'm just saying, the steel cage should not be used as a precursor to another match. It should be the be-all, end-all. That's what it used to be. That's what it should be. I don't think wrestling is going to get back to that point, but, that's just a minor gripe. But other than that, though, I thought it was a good main event. I liked it, and it was a good way of closing off the show. So on the whole, I thought this was a decent show. I don't want to say it was a great show, but it was pretty good for what it was. I thought One Night Stand a couple weeks later was a lot better. It featured a lot of the feuds that you saw on this show, the culmination of them, including Undertaker and Edge in a TLC matchup, H and Orton in Last Man Standing, like I said before, Cena and JBL in a First Blood matchup. So, from top to bottom, this card was pretty solid. I didn't think it was a great show, but One Night Stand '08 is the pay-per-view you want to watch for all the Extreme Rules matches, where every match truly was Extreme Rules, unlike nowadays where there are some matches that aren't Extreme Rules, whatever. That was not the case back in 2008 at the start of the event, in the inception of One Night Stand, Extreme Rules, or whatever they were calling it at that time. And I already reviewed that show here on the channel last June, I think it was. So if you can go back and check that out if you want my full thoughts on One Night Stand '08. But yeah, Judgment Day '08, solid show. I thought the best match of the night was easily Shawn Michaels versus Jericho. Good main event, good world title match. The undercard was pretty decent as well. I mean, the women's title match was fine for what it was. Hardy and MVP, a pleasantly surprising bout. The opener between Cena and JBL was the truly only boring match on the show, but the tag team title match was a nice little follow-up to that bout and kind of got the crowd back on their feet. So a decent show, nothing like must-see that you need to go out of your way to watch, but for what it is, I enjoyed it. Especially given the fact, the fact that I grew up around this time and started watching wrestling around this time in 2008 definitely factored into my enjoyment of the show, but even then I didn't think it was an amazing show. It was okay for what it was. Backlash was a little bit better. One Night Stand was a lot better, so make sure to check out those shows if you're watching old pay-per-views back from 2008. So that's going to do it. My review of 2008 Judgment Day is all wrapped up. I'll be back on Saturday with my review of Judgment Day 2009. But in the meantime, in between time, you guys can catch me on Twitter at WrestleRant. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this video. All support is greatly appreciated. And last but not least, make sure to check out my website, nextairwrestling.net, for my full written reviews of Raw, SmackDown, Main Event, TNA Impact Wrestling, Superstars, Lucha Underground, and everything else in between. So like I said before, folks, make sure to check back on Saturday for my full review of Judgment Day 2009. Until then, have a great week, and I'll see you guys then.